Tracy Sabol tonight on EWTN News Nightly. Recovery mode. Deadly Hurricane Milton slams Florida, leaving millions without power. We have the latest on the damage and the rebuilding effort. Military offensive. Another round of Israeli airstrikes targeting terrorists, this time on a former school turned into a shelter. Homework. Analysis of a new study finding many U.S. states now have a record number of homeschoolers. Plus, making waves. An update on this year's March for Life and why a professional surfer is set to play a major role. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Thanks for being with us on the Feast of St. Francis Borgia. Our top story tonight, Hurricane Milton leaves a deadly path of destruction across Florida. It made landfall last night as a Category 3 storm. Water flooded some Gulf Coast communities and tornadoes spread damage inland. Today, after receiving a briefing on the storm, President Joe Biden delivered remarks on the federal response to Milton. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen.
That's right, Tracy. President Joe Biden said today search and rescue teams have been at the ready for any calls for help. This as Milton plowed across Florida, knocking out power to more than 3 million customers. And it whipped up a barrage of tornadoes. Multiple deaths have been reported. Milton spared Tampa, a direct hit. The storm tracked to the south in the final hours and made landfall in Siesta Key, about 70 miles south of Tampa.
At the White House, President Joe Biden, while monitoring the latest deadly hurricane to slam the U.S., addresses the nation.
There's still very dangerous conditions in the state, and people should wait to be given all clear by their leaders before they go out.
Hurricane Milton brought powerful winds, a dangerous storm surge, and flooding to much of Florida. It weakened to a Category 1 storm as it moved through. Power outages widespread, and tragically, lives lost.
The Coast Guard and the Army Corps of Engineers are assessing how fast they can reopen the port of Tampa to get fuel, food, water, and other basic goods flowing into the area again and quickly.
Roof panels atop the home of the Tampa Bay Rays ripped to shreds by Hurricane Milton. Debris scattered across the field and throughout the seating areas. Daylight shows vehicles stuck in flooded streets in Hillsborough County. You can see a high water rescue unit passing through. An aerial view also shows a crane that collapsed in St. Petersburg. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says first responders worked through the night.
And what we can say is the storm was significant, but thankfully this was not the worst case scenario.
In the White House press briefing room, Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas.
Milton may have passed, but the danger it poses has not. Downed power lines, flood waters, non-potable drinking water, and debris are creating deadly conditions.
As Florida grapples with the impact of Milton, presidential campaigning remains in full swing. Vice President Kamala Harris attending a Univision town hall in Las Vegas before going to a rally in Phoenix. Former President Barack Obama also hitting the campaign trail, making his first appearance for Harris at a rally tonight in Pittsburgh. And former President Donald Trump, meanwhile, speaking at the Economic Club of Detroit.
Before we begin, I want to send our love to everyone affected by the hurricane. As you know, it was a rough night.
In cautioning people impacted by the hurricane to be safe, President Biden also warned that often more lives are lost in the days following the storm than during the actual storm itself. He also warned against price gouging and admonished anyone spreading misinformation, emphasizing that lives are on the line. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
And to discuss the impact of Hurricane Milton, I want to bring in now former FEMA Administrator Craig Fugate. Mr. Fugate, great to be with you today. Thank you for your time. I know you are in Florida right now. What are your initial observations of the storm and its aftermath?
Well, I'm hearing a lot of people saying it wasn't as bad as forecasted, but I wouldn't tell that to anybody that lost their homes in this storm. We first started out with a major outbreak of tornadoes, and that was where we saw the initial loss of life, and there's substantial damage. And it wasn't near where Milton was coming ashore, and it occurred before the storm got there. The storm itself, I think there was a lot of focus on Tampa Bay. they still had a lot of impacts. But when you get down into Sarasota, Manatee counties, just south of that area, they took the brunt of that storm surge, and there are still areas as they're getting in, they're starting to see that damage. And then the other thing that was, I think, well forecasted was we knew this storm was going to be a major wind event across Central Florida. And we're seeing extensive widespread power outages. I think the last reports were over 3.5 million people. And to give people a reference point, if you went from Tampa, what we call the I-4 corridor, and you drove from Tampa to Orlando and then over to Daytona Beach, that region took the heaviest winds from this storm. And then as it was exiting the state, we got reverse or storm surge that was north of the storm as it was pulling off the coast up into the St. Augustine area and winds along the coastal areas. So while it didn't hit Tampa directly, you're seeing images of the damages there. And some of those areas had just gone through Helene.
Yeah, it's really hard to imagine, especially if you're not there. And you, in your career, have seen so many natural disasters, probably more than you can even count. What are the first stages for FEMA right now in recovery efforts?
Well, FEMA is supporting the governor. And so I think when we talk about this response, I think as a nation, we tend to talk about disaster response, and FEMA is a verb. The reality is the response is being led at the local level, the governor and the state teams, mutual aid. FEMA is providing assistance as required, and that's primarily in this first 24 hours has been additional search and rescue teams to augment the state. But the state's leading that response. So the first priority, and this doesn't really change, is always going to be on life saving.
Yeah, and we talk about what you should do. What about what folks shouldn't do in a time like this? Any advice?
Yeah, this is the critical first day. People that have evacuated, there is a strong desire to get home and see what happened. I think everybody's been very clear. Stay where you're at. It's safe. Don't try to get back in. There's still got a lot of debris. There's down power lines. Not very good, not very safe to get back in there. And you're also going to slow down the recovery because the more people that get on the road, you're blocking utility trucks and rescue crews. If you're in the area of impact, stay home, stay off the roads, check on your neighbors, and be careful because we've seen, and this is something that I've watched, unfortunately, in Florida too many times, where we did a good job on getting people to evacuate and kept people safe before the storm hit, but we have more people lose their lives after the storm in recovery. We get a lot of people out there that are not used to being up on ladders, they're not used to operating chainsaws. We see people operating generators where they're too close to the house or sometimes in a covered carport, and they get carbon monoxide poisoning and lose their lives that way. I was really surprised after one storm to see our leading cause of death after the hurricanes was falls and head trauma. And then tonight, there's going to be a lot of places without power. There's no traffic signals. And we saw some of our worst fatalities in places like Charlotte County after Hurricane Charlie with home crashes that were occurring at night because people had no reference to where they were. They were driving at highway speeds, came across an intersection, and never knew they were crossing an intersection until they lost their life.
Yeah, well, all good advice there. Thank you so much, sir, for your insights and your expertise. We appreciate it. Thanks for having me. Our famous response, the victims of Hurricane Helene is being criticized by the Speaker of the House as Mike Johnson toured some of the hardest hit areas of North Carolina yesterday. He raised concerns about the federal agency's slow response in distributing funds, but he reassured residents that help is on the way, saying money would be distributed once damage assessment were completed by the state. All right, now to the Middle East, where Israel's security cabinet is expected to vote on its response to Iran's ballistic missile attack sometime today. This comes amid a deadly day of violence in Gaza. Palestinian officials say at least 27 people were killed when an Israeli airstrike hit a school sheltering displaced people. The IDF said it was targeting militants, but witnesses said the strike hit a meeting of aid workers. Israel launched a large-scale air and ground attack against Hamas in northern Gaza earlier this week. 130 Israeli reservists and soldiers are threatening to stop serving the military if the government does not seek a deal for the release of hostages. They sent an open letter to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, writing, "Today it is clear that the continuation of the war in the Gaza Strip not only delays the return of the hostages from captivity, but also endangers their lives. We who are currently serving or have served with dedication, risking our lives, hereby announce that if the government does not immediately change direction and work towards a deal to bring the hostages home, we will no longer be able to continue serving." The IDF issued a response letter writing that it views any call to refuse reserve duty with the utmost seriousness and cases would be reviewed on an individual basis. Well, tributes are pouring in after the news that Ethel Kennedy, widow of Senator Robert F. Kennedy, has died. Kennedy was by her husband's side when he was assassinated back in 1968, then went on to raise their 11 children. She founded the RFK Center for Justice and Human Rights. In 2014, she received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from then President Barack Obama. A statement by her family, she is described as a devout Catholic and a daily communicant. Kennedy was hospitalized after suffering a stroke in her sleep on October 3rd. She was 96 years old. And we have a lot more still to come here on EWTN News Nightly, including a class of their own. We examine a recent study on the rising number of homeschooled students, plus a closer look at the hotly contested Senate race in Arizona. Stick around. Well, Election Day is less than a month away, and voters in some states, including Arizona, are already casting ballots. The state has an important Senate race that could decide control of the chamber. Republican Carrie Lake, a former TV anchor, and Democrat Congressman Ruben Gallego faced off in their first and only debate for the seat of retiring Senator Kyrsten Sinema. The two tackled several issues, including border security and abortion.
President Trump came along and actually secured the border, but he had to do it with one hand tied behind his back because people like my opponent were fighting him every step of the way, would not give a penny for that border wall. That border wall keeps us safe. We've seen it here in Arizona. Ruben Gallego has supported every step of the way Kamala Harris, the border czar, and Joe Biden's open border policy, which has ushered in 20 million people illegally.
Congressman Gallego defended his record and says he supported a bipartisan border security bill that failed to pass the Senate.
I have voted and brought thousands of Border Patrol agents to Arizona, have voted and funded hundreds of miles of border walls where needed, where our experts wanted it. This is why I'm supportive of the border enforcement bill, the compromise bill that was supported by Border Patrol.
The two also clashed over abortion.
It should be left to the states. I agree with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She said this should be a decision left to the states. Everyone knew it was unconstitutional.
I would codify Roe. Okay. It is absolutely abhorrent that my 15-month-old daughter has less rights and control of her body than her mother and then her grandma.
Arizona voters will decide whether to add the so-called right to an abortion to the state constitution. Arizona law bans abortion after 15 weeks. The amendment seeks to strike down any law prohibiting abortion.
Whatever the law ends up being, whatever our choice ends up being, I will respect. I will never pass a federal abortion ban, nor will I approve or vote for federal tax dollars being used for abortion.
Congressman Gallego says he doesn't believe that answer.
Do we want politicians like Carrie Lake to be involved in these very, very difficult decisions when they should be left to the woman, the doctor, and the family?
According to current polling, almost 75% of Arizona voters support the abortion amendment. Opponents say it goes too far and could lead to unlimited and unregulated abortions in Arizona. According to a recent study, the number of students being homeschooled has reached an all-time high in several states. A report compiled by the Johns Hopkins School of Education's Homeschool Research Lab found that 90% of the states that shared their data had a rise in the number of homeschooled children from the previous year. While the report revealed the total number of students overall is declining due in part to lower birth rates, the number of students attending homeschool is increasing. And according to one researcher, Angela Watson, that growth can no longer be attributed to the COVID pandemic. And Angela Watson, Senior Research Fellow at the Johns Hopkins Institute for Education Policy, joins us now to talk more about this report. Dr. Watson, great to have you on the show. We appreciate it. So tell us, what stood out the most to you about this report?
So what we think is really interesting, of course, the growth is very interesting, but the interesting part to me is the different trends that we see. So in some states, we see a continuous growth trend, which means that homeschooling was growing before the pandemic. During the pandemic, the numbers shot up. And then after the pandemic, they continued to grow, right? So continuous growth throughout the pandemic. But we have many other states where we're seeing what we're calling a rebounding trend, where after the pandemic, homeschooling receded, which is what everybody thought would happen. Once things went back to normal in the world, people would go back to their normal form of schooling. But what we're seeing now is that there was a decline in homeschool participation just after the pandemic. But in many of those states, that number is going back up again as of last year. So in the 23-24 academic school year, we're seeing this rebounding effect or increased growth happening again. And this time we know that it's not because of the pandemic. Now, we don't know exactly what is causing it, but it's certainly not related to major disruptions of established school systems and people going home to educate their kids.
Yeah, it definitely is interesting. Are there regions in the United States where maybe homeschooling is a little bit more prevalent or popular than others?
Sure. I mean, there are some differences by region, and it's worth noting, too, that we don't have any information for about 20 states. So only 30 states collect data and then report that data. So the other 20, we don't really know what's happening. There is thinking that in some of those states, the numbers are quite high, or the percentages are quite high of homeschoolers. In other areas that maybe have more restrictive homeschool laws, which would cause people either not to homeschool or not to report their homeschooling to the state, we see some smaller numbers. But by and large, when we look at these increases, it's red states, blue states, it's all across the country from coast to coast where we're seeing this growth or regrowth in homeschool participation.
Now, I'm sure this report doesn't give a lot of answers to this, but curious if you know, anecdotally, overall, is there a number of reasons why people choose to homeschool? Do you know anything about that?
Yes. So we have information from surveys of parents about why they choose homeschooling. Historically, religion was one of the most important reasons that people homeschooled, and it's still up there. But for the last, even before COVID, for the last near decade, the primary reason that people choose homeschooling is safety. And so parents are concerned about the safety of their child. That can look like physical safety, bullying, of course, racism. These are all concerns that could fall under this safety concern. And parents are also concerned about the academic instruction in school or what their children are learning in school. And so there are various components there, but those two seem to be coming to the front in modern homeschooling.
Yeah, and before I let you go, where do you see this going, homeschooling? Do you see it getting more popular?
I really do. More and more parents are innovating new ways to educate their children, especially after the pandemic. We see lots of micro schools popping up, lots of hybrid schools where students will homeschool for a couple of days a week and go to a brick and mortar school 2 or 3 days a week. There are lots of virtual programs and et cetera, et cetera. Like, parents just keep coming up with new ways to get the needs met for their family. So we really do think that this trend is going to continue. Now, whether they continue to call it homeschooling or we call it some different name, I don't know. But more and more innovation, I think, for us in education.
All right. That sounds wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Angela Watson. We appreciate it. God bless.
Thank you.
Up next on EWTN News Nightly, global gathering, new developments with the Synod on Synodality. We have analysis from Jonathan Liedl. Plus, what a racket! An update on the future plans for one of the greatest players in tennis history. Preparations are well underway for the 2025 March for Life in the nation's capital. Today, organizers unveiled the theme, Every Life, Why We March.
Since I began with the March for Life, we've been using the hashtag Why We March so that people can tell their stories, essentially. So the fun aspect of Why We March is, why do you march? Why are you pro-life? That's really the question underneath, and the personal stories are very moving.
March for Life President Jeannie Mancini emphasizes a need to do a better job telling the powerful and successful stories of the pro-life movement. Doing so could change hearts and minds and save lives. Organizers also say the keynote address will come from professional surfer Bethany Hamilton, a pro-lifer who in 2003 survived a shark attack. And you'll be able to catch all the action for the March for Life with our all-day coverage right here on EWTN, starting at 9 a.m. Eastern on January 24th, 2025. Don't miss it. And it is the second week of the Synod on Synodality in Rome, and hundreds of participants are gathering every day to discuss how to improve the church's mission. Bishops, religious, and lay people from across the globe are expressing their ideas in the General Assembly. Recently, they were divided into smaller study groups to discuss particular issues, and they are set to tackle a wide range of issues. Joining us now from Rome is Jonathan Liedl, senior editor for the National Catholic Register. Jonathan, great to have you back. We are almost halfway through the second part of the Synod on Synodality. What are some of the pressing issues that are being discussed, and what stands out the most to you so far?
Yeah, Tracy, you're exactly right. We're halfway through this process, going through the Instrumentum Laboris. Some of the topics that have come up inside the Paul VI Hall include how to increase collaboration between laity and the clergy, how also to get lay people, and especially lay women, in more positions of church leadership that don't require ordination. But actually, at a recent press conference, Synod organizers shared that the speech, the topic that got the most applause from inside the Synod Hall was when a delegate, a mother, a laywoman, stood up and she expressed her concern that not enough is being talked about Christian initiation for young children. So how to welcome young children, including her own, into the faith. So that just gives you a sense of some of the issues and some of the topics currently being discussed here in Rome.
Yeah, and Jonathan, we know after last year's session, Pope Francis took controversial topics off this year's agenda and instead assigned them to a separate study groups. What's the status of that?
That's right, Tracy. Pope Francis created these 10 study groups to look at controversial issues like the possibility of women deacons or how to discern controversial issues related to sexuality. He created these groups really with the intention of providing more in-depth study to them and then also allowing the Synod meetings to focus more on questions of participation and mission. At the beginning of this year's session on October 2nd, the groups did present to the wider assembly on the status of their work. And so, for instance, Cardinal Fernandez, who is the head of the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, he presented on the group on looking at the possibility of women deacons. He said the question was not mature right now. It wasn't the time to move forward on that, or the door was currently not open. But even though these issues have been moved to the sides and these study groups are meant to not distract from the Synod, they've kind of become almost one of the main topics at the Synod on Synodality. Some delegates have expressed concerns about maybe not clarity on how they work or who is running them, and also have expressed the desire to be able to contribute and interact with the experts in these study groups. So Synod organizers took that into account. They've emphasized that the study group should not be seen as completely separate from the Synod, and in fact, participants will be able to meet with the people leading these groups later on this month. And in fact, Tracy, all Catholics across the world will have the opportunity to share their contributions via email sent to Synod organizers on these controversial issues being discussed in study groups.
And Jonathan, before I let you go, any other takeaways?
Yeah, well, one thing to point out, Tracy, is that there's a lot of media coverage about so-called women's ordination. But from my conversations with delegates inside the Synod Hall, the noise outside doesn't match the reality inside. It's not a dominant topic of conversation among delegates. In fact, Bishop Anthony Randazzo, an Australian who's president of the Oceania Bishops Federation, he said that this issue is an obsession among a small minority of powerful Western voices, and it actually detracts from the real needs and concerns of women. So a very powerful statement there.
All right, Jonathan, thank you so much for weighing in. Always appreciate it. God bless. A new United Nations report is speaking out against biological males competing in women's sports. The study calls for a separate athletic category for transgender people. In its presentation earlier this week, the UN Special Watchdog also highlighted several severe injuries to women and girls who were forced to compete against biological males. Well, finally tonight, one of the greats in the history of tennis is stepping down after serving the game well for many years. Rafael Nadal says the Davis Cup next month will be his last event. Nadal won 22 Grand Slam titles, including 14 on the clay courts of the French Open. The 38-year-old has suffered several injuries recently. Raised a Catholic, reports say that he stepped away from the faith, but his 2-year-old son was recently baptized into the Catholic Church. Said one rival to Nadal, "Your legacy won't be matched." We thank you for watching tonight. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, X, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Tracy Sabol. Good night and God bless.